Hello, my lovely YouTubers. So in this video, we are going to be talking about Dendrobium nobiles, and I have pulled out two of my Dendrobium nobiles here. This is Dendrobium Love Memory Fizz, and this is Dendrobium nobile alba hood. So it is a alba, which means it'll have white blooms when it decides to bloom. It is a keiki, and I got this plant when I went to Owen's Orchids in North Carolina. And the grower there was kind enough to snap off one of the keikis of his mother plant and give it to me as a sort of a little freebie. Because we did get into quite the discussion about Dendrobium nobiles, so I did want to share that with all of you. There's a lot of conflicting information about how to grow Dendrobium nobiles, and so I wanted to give you my personal experience with growing the Dendrobium nobiles. There's many YouTubers. They all have their different ways of growing Dendrobium nobiles, and I would say that my way is a little bit different than the way that they grow theirs. So my way is not necessarily the right way. It's just the way that I use to grow my orchids. I do things a little bit differently than some of the other YouTubers, but I would say that I have pretty decent success, so I wanted to share that with you guys. So for this plant right here, and this one as well, I usually keep them in plastic pots. This one is actually in a terracotta clay pot to sort of keep the root zone cooler. Especially in the wintertime, the Dendrobium nobiles, they need that cool winter rest. So I placed this one inside a terracotta pot to keep it a little bit cooler. I'm not expecting anything from this one because it's still a baby. But I have been keeping it on the drier side, letting it go through its first winter rest. Now, when I was talking to Owen from Owen's Orchids, he was talking about the Dendrobium nobiles because actually the plant that this one came off of was a huge Dendrobium nobile with probably over 100 keikis hanging off of it every which way. And I asked him, how do you get keikis? And he said that whenever you start to water, when the buds are developing, they will essentially turn into keikis. So he said whenever you have your Dendrobium nobiles, it's essential to give them a dry winter rest. And you don't start watering them in the springtime until you see new growth forming. So that's what I do with my Dendrobium nobiles. I don't give them water that they're used to. Like in the summertime, I give them water every single day. But in the wintertime, whenever an orchid grower says dry winter rest, it's not what you're thinking. It's not completely cut out water, because that's not what these guys get in the nature, in wild. So in the wild, they don't go completely dry like the Sahara Desert or anything. They get lots and lots of humidity, and that humidity is what keeps them a little bit drier in the winter, but also provides their canes with moisture. So when they say dry winter rest, they just mean water less. So instead of watering every single day, like you should be doing in the summertime, depending on your growing mediums and such, but I water mine every single day in the summertime. But in the wintertime, what I'll do is I rely on the canes. I rely on the canes to tell me when it is time to water. Now, I don't rely on the older canes because the older canes do start to shrivel and they will die off eventually. I actually rely on the newer growths. So I'll pan the camera up here. So I rely on the new growth, and the new growth here still has its leaves. Some of the leaves are falling off. You can see that one there. But I rely on the new growth to tell me when to water. And if you can see, the new growth is nice and plump. So you can see there. Nice and plump. And actually some buds forming. There is a bud just there, that little bump. And a bud right there forming. Just a little bump right now. But I will not start watering this plant. And I think there's a root coming out of, yeah, there is. There's a root coming out of the bottom. I was wondering why it was so hard to set down. So, I do not start watering my Dendrobium nobiles until I see new growth in the springtime. Now, the reason for this is because excess water can actually create what are known as keikis, baby plants. And that's how this little guy was formed. His mother plant was kept too wet during her supposed dry winter winter rest. And he said that all of these keikis formed, so he snapped one off and was kind enough to give it to me, and I'm very excited for this one to bloom. So I follow the advice that Owen gave me. I don't water my orchids, the Dendrobium nobiles. I grow them actually a lot like I grow my catasetums. Now, catasetums don't like any water when they're in their rest phase. So when they say dry winter rest for those, they really mean it, because any water on your catasetum during the winter rest phase will actually cause the pseudobulbs to rot. So that's probably the difference between the Dendrobium nobiles and the catasetums. But in the springtime, whenever I see new growth on my catasetums, I will wait until the roots get about 3 inches long, and once that happens, I will resume regular watering. Same with my Dendrobium nobiles. Once I see new growths in the springtime, and I'm sure that they have roots that can handle it, not all of their older roots die off either. These roots here will remain alive, so it is okay to give them a little bit of water in the springtime as soon as you see new growth. Now, you don't want to overdo it. Same thing with light. A lot of people assume that because they were growing their orchid in a bright window, that they'll be able to set it outside and not have to worry about sunburn. That is not the case at all. Our human eyes are not adjusted to the kind of light that plants are able to see. So what I mean by that is that just because you think it's bright inside, the plant might think that it's really, really dark. So that's why it's important to measure with foot candles whenever you're deciding what kind of orchids you're wanting to grow. But you don't want to set your plants, even if it's a cattleya who's used to direct sunlight, you don't want to set that cattleya outside in direct sunlight until it has been properly adjusted. So what I do with mine is I'll set them in the shade outdoors and then slowly move them into brighter light conditions. So same thing with watering. You'll start with one watering per week, and then you'll gradually increase that as the roots are able to handle more and more water. So that is how I grow my Dendrobium nobiles. I try to grow them the way that they would grow in nature. Really, that applies to all of my orchids. I try to grow them the way that they are used to in nature. So I do give them water in the winter time, but it's not water like a cupful. It's just a misting around the roots to plump up the canes. Once that's done, I don't water. Usually that happens maybe about once every 2 weeks because you're keeping these guys cool. So when you're keeping orchids cool, they don't require as much water. They're not going to be making energy or food or growths, so they don't need to be watered quite so frequently. Now, in the springtime, in the summertime, they're creating those new growths, so they're rapidly absorbing the nutrients from their canes, so they need lots and lots of water. So that's why it's important to heavily fertilize and heavily water your Dendrobium nobiles in the spring and summertime. So that's really how I grow my Dendrobium nobiles. I hope that this video was informative and you guys got something out of it. I know that I'm not growing the way that all the other YouTubers necessarily do on YouTube, but I do have buds forming. So I'd like to think that I'm doing something right. And this is the way that I've been growing my Dendrobium nobiles as long as I can remember, so yeah. But I also wanted to show you guys, put these guys out of the way for a second, show you guys another example of a plant that likes its winter rest. So here we go. This is my Moniara Millennium Magic Witchcraft. A lot of people have this one. Very, very popular plant, and mine has actually started to create a new growth. So it's kind of doing a weird little dormancy dance here. It has the yellowing leaves, so I've reduced water, but it has this new growth here. So it can be confusing for people when the plant doesn't always do what it's supposed to. Usually when they go into their winter dormancy, they shouldn't be growing these new growths here at the bottom. But orchids don't always grow the way that the books tell us they're supposed to grow. Actually, this leaf can probably come off. There we go. So So as this pseudobulb goes into dormancy, this one is starting to come into growth. So what should you do for an orchid that is giving you mixed signals? Well, for your catasetum types, this one here is not even a natural hybrid. You would never find this orchid in the wild. This is a Moniara, which is a made-up genus name by combining 4 different genera into one genus. So it became Moniara, Millennia Magic Witchcraft. So you would never see this orchid in the wild, which is why it's so difficult to predict the growing pattern for this one. But here is what I'm going to do for my Moniara, Millennia Magic Witchcraft, and this thing is huge. I mean, look at my hand. Anyways, so what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to treat it like any other catasetum coming out of its dormancy phase. Once these roots get a little bit longer, you can see the roots there. Once they get a little bit longer, this guy is going to get full sun, lots and lots of water, and lots of fertilizer. I'm going to basically ignore the growth signs here because I do have this new growth here. Now this one didn't bloom, so I think that's why it is doing this weird sort of dormancy dance. It was denied its bloom cycle because I got it last November. It's still December. Anyways, 2 months ago, 3 months ago? I don't know. Anyways, I got this plant this year, so it's new to me. But I got it in spike, and the spikes actually died off. You can probably see that YouTube video that I made. It's one of my first ones. But because it was denied its ability to bloom, I'm guessing that's why it's doing this weird sort of dormancy. Do I want to be in dormant or do I want to grow something phase here? So I will wait until the roots get longer, and then that's when I will supply this orchid with tons and tons of water, fertilizer, just like any of my other catasetum types. So it is hard to know what to do all the time. There is no one right method for growing orchids. That's why I love them, because one person can say that they grow their Phalaenopsis in dirt, and another person can say that they grow their Phalaenopsis in lava rock, and one person can say they grow their Phalaenopsis in bark chips, and no one way is going to be absolute. So that's what I love about orchids. They are survivors. They can handle anything that you throw at them. They're just amazing plants. So that's what I plan to do for this orchid here. They're always hybridizing. They're always making new plants. That's why the grow cycles are so confusing for new growers. Now with your Dendrobium nobiles, that is definitely the case. They're always creating newer hybrids because they want to create hybrids that make lots and lots of blooms, that have tons and tons of blooms, that are fragrant, that are beautiful, that are different colors. They're always hybridizing, and I'll show you guys an example. So here we have the different Phalaenopsis orchids that are over in Taiwan right now being bred, and they're being selectively bred for larger lips. So you can see sort of the transformation between the Phalaenopsis species there. I think it is so cool. They're always coming out with the biggest, the best, what's the showiest. So over in Taiwan is where they're doing that. I got this from my Orchids magazine from the American Orchid Society. This was one of my favorite articles in last month's subscription. And you can see just visually how they are selectively breeding their Phalaenopsis. So they're always breeding, always hybridizing. That is why it is so difficult sometimes, especially if you get into the Dendrobium nobile types, because they're creating Dendrobium nobiles that require a shorter winter rest. Shorter winter rest means blooms come sooner, and they, of course, want those blooms to come sooner so that they can make more money. So it is dependent on the genetics of your orchid, your growing environment, but the way that I grow mine is no water, regular watering until the springtime. Alrighty guys, so I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you should go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and go ahead and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this one in the future. Alrighty guys, I will see you later.